Hello there! Today we are making these adorable felt Yetis. They are as easy to make as they are adorable, and don't worry if you've never sewn something before, this is a very beginner-friendly craft. It goes along with the Teen Take and Make kit in York this month, but it's just as easy to make on your own. In fact, you can find a PDF of the pattern in the description below. Other than that, all you need is some felt. I have 3 colors here: white for the body, gray for the horns, and this aqua for the face. The ones in the kit already have these doll eyes on them. And then we also have a belly piece here. You will also need some thread, some polyfill or any other kind of stuffing, a needle, and some scissors. And now that we have our materials, let's begin. So first, jumping right on in, we're going to sew the face and the belly to the front of our Yeti. When I put the eyes into the face pieces, I didn't pay attention to how long the pointy bits are here on the back, so to make the face lie flatter against the body, we're going to have to poke the eyes through the front of the body piece as well. You can try to force them through by hand, but if you already have scissors anyway, it's easier to do a little snip and poke them through that way. So that's what I'm gonna do. If you're not using the kit and don't have doll eyes like this to put on your Yeti, you can also draw them in with a marker or cut out some circles in black felt or any other color, doesn't matter, and sew them in individually or glue them down, however you want. We're adding these pieces to the front now because it's a lot easier than doing it later when the Yeti is all sewn up and stuffed later. Now that we've got our face and body flat against each other, or at least flatter, it's time to sew it down. For that, you will need your needle and thread. Go ahead and cut a length of thread that is comfortable for you. I generally use about an arm's length at a time. Any longer than that, and I get frustrated with the thread getting twisted and tangled. This needle and the needles in the kit are quite large, unnecessarily large. But it makes it easier to get the thread through the eye of the needle, which is helpful if you've never done this before. And that's exactly what you do. You stick one end of your thread through the eye of the needle, and then match it up with the other end of the thread. This thread doesn't show up very well on camera, being white on a very light table, but I'm hoping it will be enough. And then you tie the ends into a knot. There are plenty of ways to do that, but the way I was taught to do it is to take the ends, wrap them around your index finger, pinching the thread between your thumb and your index finger, and then roll the thread off your finger so it twists together. When you get to the tip of your finger, pinch the thread between your thumb and your middle finger and slide it down the twisted loop until it naturally forms a knot. Now, these knots are generally too small for felt, especially with such a big needle. It will just fall right out of the fabric. So, I'm going to repeat that process again to make another knot on top of the one I just made. I'm going to wrap it around my finger, roll, pinch, and pull. And hopefully, as it did here, the knots get tangled in each other and make one big knot. Sometimes though, the thread doesn't cooperate and I have to do this over and over again. That's annoying, but oh well. The important part is that we are now ready to start sewing. We have our front body piece, our face piece, and our needle and thread. To hide this big messy knot, I'm going to start by sticking the needle in through the back. That way, when all is said and done, no one will ever have to know it was there. Now I'm going to sew all the way around the face with a whip stitch. A whip stitch is one of the most basic stitches that you can do, where all you're doing is sewing loops. In this case, I'm going in with the needle on the blue side and out on the white side, over and over again, while you try not to stab yourself in the finger in the process. There are plenty of other stitches that you can use. There are plenty of books and videos on embroidery online and at the library, but the whip stitch works just fine for this. As a side note, you can just as easily skip the sewing altogether and use glue instead. The problem with that, however, is that glue doesn't hold felt down very well. Hot glue would work pretty well, and there are fabric glues specifically designed for felt, but regular craft glue won't last very long. You don't need to pull very hard on the thread as you tighten your stitches. You only need to make it tight enough to hold the pieces in place. And if you pull too tight, you could rip the felt fabric. This isn't like sewing a garment where you need those stitches to be strong and hold up against wear and tear. Unless you're giving this Yeti to your dog as a chew toy, it should be fine. Try to keep your stitches even, about the same length and about the same width apart from each other. Also try to make your stitches run at a 90-degree angle from the edge of the face piece. Of course, the emphasis is on the word try. Despite the fact that I've been sewing my whole life, I have never been very good at hand stitching. My mind tends to drift and I get impatient, so I rush through it. But crooked stitches never unalived anyone, at least not that I'm aware of. Alright, so now that the face is sewn on, we need to tie off the thread. To do that, there are a lot of different methods you can use. You can cut off the thread and tie the two parts together, or my favorite method is to take a tiny bit of the fabric, not enough to make a stitch, just enough to anchor the knot to where I want it, and then go back through the loop that I just created, pulling it into a knot. Then I'm going to do that one more time to double knot it, and it's done. Well, at least the knot is done. Once you clip the thread, if there's enough remaining, you can tie a knot in the new ends and move along to the next thing, which in this case is the Yeti's belly. And really, you just do the same thing to the belly that you did to the face. You sew a whip stitch all the way around the edge. Once the belly is sewn on, the front of your Yeti is complete. Which means that we can now begin putting our Yeti together. First, and most obviously, we put the front and the back pieces of the Yeti body together. The tricky part comes with adding the horns and the legs. For that, as we sew around the outside of the body, we're going to sew them into the seam between the two layers of the body. So, make a mental note of where you want the horns and the legs positioned so you know to stop before you get to those parts and add them in. You also need to decide at what point you want to add the stuffing to your Yeti. For efficiency's sake, I'll add the stuffing at the same time I stop to add the horns. All of that is why I'm going to start over here in the middle of the side, so I can get into a groove with the stitches before I have to stop and add something new. So let's go! I have my needle and thread ready to go, and to hide the knot at the end of the thread, I'm going to go in through the back side of one of the layers of the body, and then putting the layers back together, I'm going to start whip stitching around the edges of the body. It's the same basic principle as sewing on the face and the belly. We're just doing it around an edge, just making loops of thread around and around the outside of the fabric. Another popular stitch for this is the blanket stitch. That one is also super easy, but for today I want it to be as basic as possible. However, if you already know how to do a blanket stitch and would prefer to do that, go for it. Or, if you would like to learn how to do it, there are plenty of resources out there for you to do so that you can do it too. Once again, the idea is to make the stitches as even as possible, and as perpendicular to the edge as we can. Or at least we try. Okay, here's where I'm going to stop so that I can add the legs. I'm going to stick them in between the front and the back layers of the body and try to make them as even as I can. I designed the legs so that the more curved part goes on the outside and the straighter parts face each other, but you can take whatever creative liberties you want with your Yeti. And now here's a curveball for you. We're going to change up the type of stitch that we're using, switching to a running stitch that will go along the bottom edge. So instead of going around the outside of the edge, we're going to go up and down through the layers of felt, including the legs. Once again, we are not going around, we're going through. And make sure that you're catching the leg pieces in those stitches so they don't go falling out later. Once you're past the legs, switch back to a width stitch going around the edges and continue until you get to your next stopping point, which for me will be at the head. Alright, I'm going to stop there. But before I add the horns, I'm going to add the stuffing. I find it helpful to add little bits at a time so you can better control where the stuffing goes. I also find that the arms tend to be a little too thin to get much stuffing in them, but if you have an object like a pen or something to help shove the stuffing down in there, it might work. Kind of like reminds me of the stuffing machines at Build-A-Bear. Just don't overstuff your Yeti, at least not at this moment. You want to give yourself enough room to work as you sew up the last little bit. It can get frustrating to try to sew down layers of fabric that are quite literally bursting at the seams. Like for this Yeti, I'm going to sew down the horns and then see if I need to add any more stuffing at the last second.
3, 2, 1.
And on that subject, you add the horns the same way that you added the legs. Position them how you want them in between the front and the back layers, and then switch to a running stitch to sew them in place. are home free. Just gotta whip stitch back to where I started. Sorry about that. Technical difficulties cut me off at the last second. But all I did when I got to the end was tie off the thread and do my best to tuck the knot into the seam so it's not as noticeable. And all that's left to do after that is squish the Yeti around a bit to redistribute the stuffing, and we're done. If you want, you can make this into an ornament by adding a ribbon or something, but it's also just fine without it. Either way, you will have your very own adorable, abominable snowman. And of course, as always, thank you for watching. You can find the PDF pattern for the Yeti in the description, and you can find all sorts of resources on crafty creations like this one at the library. If you're a teen, you can stop into the York Public Library to pick up a Yeti kit while supplies last. And to check out what else is happening at the library, go to our website, yclibrary.org. Thanks again, and happy crafting!